Our title is The Toxicity of Progress.
Wait, is it actually toxic?
Of course not. So we come up with our knowledge question. Why might constitute progress in area of knowledge, and how can we know it has been achieved? By me, Ivo Braz, Alex Saich, and WWII. Now we're going to talk about, it's about two real-life situations. The use of atomic weaponry in Japan in World War II, and the Tuskegee Syphilis study. It was
Conducted from 1932 to 1972 by the American Health Service.
So personal connections, I'll start. Personally, I love history. Unfortunately, I couldn't take it in the IB. And World War II history is perfect, so it's a perfect match. I really love history as well. And I love how the ethical part was included in this, in the two real-life situations.
And I've also been crazy for history, and also very interested in doing medicine when I grow up, and therefore the Tuskegee study is very controversial in regards to the ethics in the research.
We use our imagination to forge that tomorrow. We also use our emotion to respond to such innovations. To what extent can they be ethical? Is it really for the greater good?
So in relation to our real life situations, we use ethics to consider the moral implications of choice. History as a tool to illuminate different perspectives of events, and the natural sciences to explain the practical theory behind such real life situations.
So, throughout mankind's course in history, one phenomenon remained constant: the pursuit towards progress. It seems as if we're naturally bound to search for new and innovative ways of making our lives, in practical and scientific perspective, easier and worthwhile. Knowledge and science has been constructed by striving for progress for centuries, and therefore forming our reason and the way by which we choose to perceive the world we live in.
In addition, progress constitutes of an achievement in the accumulation of knowledge that contributes to the general well-being of our society. But what exactly constitutes a progress in the area of knowledge when such concept is shadowed by stagnations and the deterioration of human life? Is such progress ever being achieved?
So, at what cost was progress made? In order to know, we must be able to analytically determine the actual knowledge, contradicted by the doubts, the myths, and the fallacies. But first, we have to ask ourselves, in regards to personal knowledge, what exactly does it mean to know? And how has knowledge been gained or achieved from such a concept that we chose to call progress? In fact, it is as if you, me, and everyone else have become closely dependent or reliant on concrete and empirical evidence in order to determine what has really been achieved by such idea of progress. But why do we rarely question it? At what cost was progress known? So progress, according to the Cambridge Online Dictionary, it's a movement to an improvement or a more developed state or a forward position. After all, isn't progress only justifiable when the majority are benefited? To powerfully illustrate such delicate and paradoxical implication, we ask you, can the atomic bomb of Japan and the Tuskegee Syphilis study be a representation of the ideology of progress, why people in both real-life situations were denied their rights and justly massacred or treated like scapegoats? If so, how can we know progress was achieved in science in regards towards the understanding of simple atomic energy?
So, to further understand progress.
So what is it? And how does it link with progress?
And we need to link utilitarianism to progress. Well, progress comes from the philosophical basis of utilitarianism, meaning that we trust ourselves in ethical doctrine, that virtue is based on utility, and that any conduct should be directed towards promoting the greatest happiness towards the greater majority. To consider such complexity of a theory, we must push beyond our ethical boundaries that exist between mankind and the true nature of progress, and distinguish how it actually contributes towards the development of our knowledge. So now we're going to get into our first real-life situation, that is the atomic bombing of Japan.
So what happened? With Japan facing the same fate of Germany in World War II, they refused an offer to surrender, and the war against America and their allies continued. In July 1945, the Allied Manhattan Project managed to successfully test the first atomic bomb in the New Mexico desert area. With this, B-29 bombers were modified for being equipped with such weaponry, and a new squadron was created. August the 69th, Hiroshima and Nagasaki respectively, of 1945. American bombers flew and dropped out for the first time bombs in the Japanese territory. It remained the first and only use of nuclear weaponry for warfare in history. So we come to our first knowledge claim.
So the myth that the bombing of two Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was needed in order to put an end to the war is not only a fallacy, but a misleading assertion that leads us to a total consensus of the rightness and leads us knowing the fuller picture of such subjects. It was believed that by putting an end to the war, millions of lives would be spared. But this is contrasted with the slaughter of around 300,000 innocent Japanese civilians. So is this ethical? Well, in the view of the Americans, around 50 to 80 million lives were spared.
But I'm afraid there's a counter-knowledge claim for that. Only it is not that simple. And the act of playing God is unethical and questions the very nature of choice. In fact, it is as if we're alienated by the fact that the use of these two bombs were completely unnecessary. They were only a decorative set piece of a large gown that covers the truth, only to shine upon the American view of achievements. Now, historically speaking, they only used the bomb to demonstrate their power towards the Soviets. So, this part, now we know that this part, the beginning of a war that will take years to dissipate, also known as the Cold War. Ironically, the only progress we are able to see here is the transition from one war to another war.
And impressing the Soviets during the early diplomatic period that ultimately became the Cold War also appears to be a significant factor. Such powerful weapons served as a showcase of American firepower, and basically not beneficial to any area of knowledge, and extremely unethical, so therefore highly questionable.
Most are unaware of the fact that increasing numbers of historians now recognize the United States did not use the atomic bomb to end the war against Japan in 1945. Moreover, this essential judgment was expressed by the vast majority of the top American military leaders in all three services, the 3 years after the war. So how can this be justifiable? Is it ethical to showcase a mass destruction weapon only to demonstrate your military power, costing lives of 300,000 innocents?
So now we relate all of this to our knowledge question, which is, what might constitute a progress in an area of knowledge, and how can we know it has been achieved?
So this is when we decided to create the theory of the Tuskegee effect. At first, it seems quite obvious. We discover new ideas and simply add them together to the previous knowledge we had, therefore developing it. Initially, we knew about the destructive explosion. Prior to the 1950s, limited consideration was given towards the dispersion of radioactivity and its dangers towards the human body. With time, we find new knowledge. The progress extended itself even further. During the 1960s, several scientists discovered that atom bombs had severe effects on the environment, disrupting the natural equilibrium of nature by adding increased radioactivity levels to the bombing site, therefore disabling future lives to prosper. They then linked how radioactivity contamination risks higher chances of cancer and leukemia. Despite this, when it comes to analyzing how such progress has been achieved and accepted in our society, it has had not been such a smooth road as commonly imagined. What limits our actual understanding behind progress, unfortunately, occurs behind those who write our history. Science has affected our understanding towards progress, as history criticizes the defeated and hides the ethical boundaries while explaining the progress of the victorious. So, in order to illustrate this paradoxical implication, picture the famous game by Hasbro, the Jenga. It looks solid, firm, and perfect. Picture it as a pillar of knowledge. For example, the knowledge we had about radiation and its dangers. But after its use, one of those blocks, one of the foundations, were challenged by the thought that, well, it's dangerous. So that caused that very structure to collapse and a new structure to be formed, using that destructive block as the new foundation. And the cycle repeats.
An essential progress in knowledge was the graduated active sequence and its harm towards nature. When the US had deployed the bomb, if they were aware of the dangers of radioactivity, Hiroshima was an essential key upon this pursuit towards understanding such disastrous effects. You have an image of a Japanese soldier that survived the Nagasaki bomb. He was diagnosed with disease X.
Disease?
Not really. Media groups and actual army went to the sites of the atomic bomb in order to promote the idea that the bomb was not toxic. Such knowledge was not existing in regards to radiation. Therefore, with the depths of thousands after the actual explosion, and cases like the one of the soldier, proved the truth behind this disastrous weapon.
So we come to our claim, final knowledge claim and conclusion about this real-life situation. Not only did most top U.S. military leaders think the bombs were unnecessary and unjustified, many were morally offended by what they regarded as the unnecessary destruction of Japanese cities and what were essentially non-combat populations. Moreover, they spoke about it quite openly and publicly, therefore setting such an act as a crime towards humanity. Yes, it could be argued that such an act did bring an end to the war, bringing progress towards America and its allies, as they successfully terminated Japan's involvement in the war. But unfortunately, it could be argued that the act was purely selfish and unethical.
So, we ask, was progress ever achieved?
Well, in the case of the atomic bomb case study, or real-life situation, although incorrect, the U.S. government argued that utilitarianism was present in their cause. This can be explained by the fact that, by destroying 2 cities in Japan, millions of American lives would be spared, and less suffering from both sides would happen, and the war would end. Japan had no intention of abandoning the war, by the way. This is a statement of the government and their knowledge that such an act brought such progress for America, not necessarily accurate or following the ethical and moral values of society.
In regard to our second real-life case study, in the history of mankind, scientific progress has definitely been seen as a controversial aspect of society. The such acts of America in the syphilis case study portray such facts. As Max Planck, German physicist, said, "I view scientific truth does not treat by convincing opponents and making them see the light, but rather because somebody eventually died, and a new generation grows up and is familiar with it."
Well, this deeply relates with our knowledge question, as it suggests that progress is presented as a scientific truth, or in fact, not always be achieved, but slowly embedded into the future generations via an osmosis of the mind, by feeding the future generations with what is perpetrated as the actual truth, but not necessarily an accurate truth. This explains how science has suffered to progress in relation to the paradigm shifts, as rejection is common in new concepts, as they challenge the reason of many and contradict their previously set ideology. Institutions like the church, in this case, set the pace for progress in some areas of knowledge, and therefore determine the way we see progress being achieved. This explains how progress is determined by who controls society, leading us to accept only certain changes, as what people may view as development for a better world isn't always the same.
Moreover, progress in actual facts leads itself towards ethics, as the manner by which it is achieved usually is hidden from becoming controversy. The ethical and moral boundaries commonly be forgotten. But when it comes towards such reality, progress may be seen as unachievable if such boundaries are broken, as several accounts in our history set such examples of progress as a great downfall for society. Then, what usually is expanded for the idea of progress. With this, the Tuskegee Syphilis study definitely conflicts itself as a progress of ethics.
So we come to our second real-life situation, that is the Tuskegee Syphilis study. And to understand this, we must go back in time.
Conducted by the American Health Service starting 1932 until 1972, with about 600 men, were all being included in a new project, the Tuskegee Syphilis study. They were all diagnosed with bad blood and offered to participate in the experiment in order to cure such mysterious disease. This term generalized anemia, fatigueness, and syphilis. He was offered a ride from clinic, meals, and insurance from an eventual death. The main aim of such experiment was to gain a understanding of such disease.
So we encounter our first knowledge consequence.
Well, the treatment wasn't exactly proven to effectively cure syphilis. But when such study began, penicillin had already been introduced and it was proved to cure syphilis, but for some odd reason, such use was discarded. The doctors had no actual intention in curing and saving the lives of such men. They only want to analyze their degeneration due to such disease, which by the way had fatal side effects. They called it bad blood without any scientific proof, and gave no knowledge for the patients towards understanding what they were actually passing through.
We then come across another knowledge consequence, the
The unethical side of such study is the use of African Americans in a moral and ethically unjust manner of research. The government aimed to study the course of the disease and therefore tricked the patients and didn't provide any effective treatment. Instead led to many subjects developing a late stage of neuropsychosis. They then infected their wives, families, and even their babies suffered from syphilis. So they treated these patients like lab rats and were literally left to die. We should ask ourselves, why only African Americans?
According to the ASCLS, American Society for Clinical Laboratory Studies, experiment conduct such study can definitely be downgraded, as it states that every clinical experience or study should 1. Maintain the integrity of the patient, ensuring their dignity and provide accurate information for them. 2. Clinical laboratory tests have the ability to contribute from their sphere of professional competence to the general well-being of the community, respecting all parts of the society equally and striving to contribute to them all. And the sample study doesn't do that.
So we come to our first knowledge point.
This test, therefore, wants further shared knowledge for medicine about the disease and the nature behind its transmission between individuals. They were able to create a genetic chain to the disease, understanding in what case would the infection rate be higher and which type of individual might be more prone towards the disease. They focus on understanding the disease, but at the same time increase the disease being spread, resulting in further more deaths.
So, well, how do these results make our knowledge question? What might constitute progress in that area of knowledge, and how can we know it has been achieved?
Well, such progress in relation to scientific knowledge definitely helped the science community at the time. But the matters by which the patients were handled creates extreme controversy towards such research, simply because a segregated ethnic group was treated simply to a scapegoat. This controversy had no punishments, resulting in the destruction of innocent families and a vast abuse of their human rights. Although such experiment is considered unethical, it brought rapid progress in medicine as the nature of science was sort of understood and how it can effectively spread in between communities. Despite this, what floods all of this with unjust reasoning is the use of humans as laboratory animals. Despite this, what floods this with unjust reasoning is the use of humans as laboratory animals, which were financially depleted African American farmers from the interior of Alabama. Most of them had never seen a doctor and therefore thought free healthcare was marvelous, excellent, and therefore they were an easy prey. Yes, such study contained voluntary participants, but the problem comes up when with such controversial lie. As in actual fact, they were holding a timed bomb, metaphorically, and the doctors were actually fully aware that they would eventually die. With this, we should take into consideration the fact that they were illiterate and had limited education levels, and therefore difficulties in greater decision comprehension of what they would pass.
With hindsight, it seemed that such real-life situation did not bring significant progress towards elimination of bad blood, especially because the cure for syphilis was already created. With this, it can only be seen the development in the understanding of such disease, the effect towards human beings.
So, how do these results link with the final outcome of this?
A report named Doing Bad in the Name of Good was produced in 1997, making President Bill Clinton apologize for the unjust acts committed by the previous governments in a legacy museum opened in the Bioethics Center in Tuskegee, honoring all the participants, but nothing more.
So we approach our conclusions.
Like Emily Durkheim said, totality of beliefs and sentiments common to the average member of society forms a determinate system with a life of its own. It can be termed collective or common consciousness.
So, therefore, progress must be determined by what the social structure considers to be progress, and not the individual's opinion, as progress needs to be accepted in order to occur in the society that we live in. So, in conclusion, what constitutes of progress is not controversial in specific cases in the history of science and technology. The fact that we consider progress towards a certain area of knowledge actually being achieved is reflected within the society that we live in. For such progress to become part of our personal knowledge, it has first to become shared knowledge, with an acceptable methodology that fits in with the ethical and moral consensus of that certain place. However, There are times where an individual challenges the prevailing shared knowledge, and this brings great dangers to that individual.
The culture, the community, our world seeks the idea of progress, sometimes in extreme manners, bringing up problems in society and a lot of deaths of innocent victims. This had brought a loss in inequality, as the benefits of such progress are generally limited to individuals from disadvantaged members of society.
Well, this concludes how ambiguity of progress is evident, which is to achieve the development of human life, making it easier and better, it's contrasted with being implemented at the easiest and most cost-efficient manner. History has shown killing less to eventually save more is a path that commonly has been taken.
But whose progress is actual progress? Does one's progress necessarily mean another diminishment? The answer is no. Not always, but in the two real-life situations we have presented, the answer is clear, yes.
Questions?
Yes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but both of your case studies included different types of progress, right?
What?
Both of your case studies included different types of progress.
Yes.
And both of them are quite unethical, from my point of view.
That's what history usually tends to show us.
So
Like
history
you just
shows you
said,
that
the
progress has
most
to be
cost-efficient
unethical.
path to be taken is therefore sparing the lives of the human minority towards the others.
So you're suggesting that progress can only come with unethical decisions.
Let me answer your question with another question. Do you not agree that now with the knowledge we have now, that these were possibly for the greater good?
Not at the time, but now yes.
Now, that's what matters.
But they were unethical decisions.
They were not. His question.
No, your question.
No, if with the knowledge we have now, that these were for the greater good.
Were they for the greater good?
With the knowledge we have now,
Do you think they were for the greater good?
Nowadays, yes, but not in the
My view
past.
of the Tuskegee, no, because my view that the Tuskegee had wasn't for a great good, with my opinion, because it didn't bring any sort of progress. It had the intention of bringing, but it didn't bring it, wasn't efficient in so many.
Yeah.
And the use of atomic weapons, well, the United States saw it as the best manner, most effective manner to win the war. Not necessarily I don't necessarily agree with that, because killed so many innocent
but
lives.
history has shown certain.
But as a counter argument, there's nuclear energy that we
Yeah, these are like the benefits.
stuff like that. But even now, when we're looking back on nuclear energy, we're like, oh.
Yeah,
no,
nuclear energy,
But always with a step back to like these
And you
guys.
don't see nuclear energy everywhere, so
Yeah, it's not the only source of energy.
The question I had for you was to do with the Soviets and the Soviets' intentions at the timing of the atomic bomb and its use on Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Ah, yes, it
Seemed
was-
very interesting. Did you research that?
Yes, it appears that the Americans were scheduled to release the bomb on the 8th,
Sixth
or the
and
6th, but they rescheduled to bomb when the Soviets were planning an attack. So basically they were trying already to strike the Soviets, even before the start of the Cold War.
They were planning an attack on where, sorry?
What?
Soviets were planning an attack where?
they were planning
It's
to
like
attack
having a beach
nuclear
bomb.
bomb. They were planning to attack Japan with nuclear weapons
Soviets
also.
were planning an attack on
Yeah.
Japan. So we killed two birds with one stone.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you. Any other
That's a
questions?
smart move.
Any other questions? Right, thank you very much, Bush. Well done.
Is it the time?
Fine.
Sure, what was time to start?
The intent